So I'm going to be going through how InterSystems Data Fabric Studio with supply chain module can be used as a supply chain data gateway. So to start, I'm going to go through a quick overview of what InterSystems Data Fabric Studio with supply chain module is. So this is a fully managed service for managing supply chain data. So we take care of all of the deployment and things like that. So you can start with an already working system. It provides a user-friendly web interface with a low-code, no-code user experience. You don't need to know any InterSystems technology in order to use this. No technical knowledge is required. And finally, it can serve as a supply chain data gateway to pull in data and push data to other enterprise applications and systems. So I'm going to now be going through a use case on how we can use this to unify data from some disconnected ERP systems. So some challenges that people face is that master data comes from a lot of different sources. There are different IDs used in different sources. So each ERP system, for example, could have different supplier IDs. And we may need a combination of all of this data to have a good, consistent source of truth. Transactional data then depends on this master data, and the IDs that it has need to match what we're actually storing in order for it to be relevant. Finally, different data sources have different data quality, different formats, and we need to make sure that that is all consistent before doing any work. So for this demo, we're going to first create a lookup table to keep track of the master data between the two IDs. We're then going to create a recipe to merge and load that data and populate the IDs. And then we're going to do some reconciliation to make sure our data is actually correct. And finally, we're going to create a recipe to load that transactional data and map that using our lookup table. Finally, we can create a snapshot of that data, which creates a record of a specific point in time, and we can use that to send to planning applications. So I'm going to switch over to our Data Fabric Studio site. And as you can see, we have a lot of different options here. And the first thing we need to do is configure our data sources. So this is where we can set up what data we're going to be loading. In this case, our data is all from CSV files, so we can create a file directory source where we can load CSV files. Once we have that set up, we need to actually upload our files, which we can do through the file manager. And then we can view them in our data catalog. So we can see in our SC files, we do have a lot of data here, including our supplier system 2 and supplier system 1 data, and we can see that the fields were auto-extracted. So once we have this, we're going to create our recipe. So ahead of time, I did create a code table that we can use to store these supplier IDs. That was done using the supply chain APIs that are built into the supply chain module. So the first thing we need to do is we need to stage our data. So we're going to stage all of the fields from our two supplier systems. This is how we actually configure what fields are going to be loaded into the system. After that, we can apply a transformation. This allows us to change how a field is set. So for example, we may want our state to be uppercase if we're using state code so that they're all consistent. We then can apply a validation. This verifies that our data is in the correct form. So in this case, we want to make sure our DUNS number is 9 digits, so we're going to verify it's within this range. And we can configure that to either give you a warning or be fatal. So if we have an invalid DUNS number, we can configure the system to just stop. We're then going to apply a reconciliation. This is kind of double checking that our data is going to be correct. So in this case, when our DUNS numbers do match, we want to make sure that our names are an exact match. This kind of gives us an extra check to verify that what we see is what we want. And again, we can make this either a warning or fatal. Finally, we're going to promote our data. So we can either promote internally to the Data Fabric Studio data model or promote to an additional source. In this case, we're actually going to store the data internally. And we're going to first promote our supplier data. As you can see, we are joining the data from our two sources and using that to populate our internal table. We also are creating this code table here. And as you can see, we're using the IDs from the two different tables and using that as a map. So once this part is done, we now can create our transactional data in the purchase order. So again, we would stage the data, and then the transformation we're applying in this case is actually utilizing that code table that we created in the last step. So as you can see, we are mapping our supplier ID field using this mapping. And then once that's done, we then can promote the data. And here you can see that we're then using this transformed field and verifying that it's getting set correctly. And when it doesn't exist, we are still going to use that default value, but this is very configurable. So now that we have all of that done, we can actually schedule these tasks. So as you can see here, it is set to manually run, but if we wanted, we could schedule this to run on a schedule, or we could run it after another dependent task. So we may want to have our purchase order transactional data be run after the other one. The final thing that we can do is we can create a snapshot of our data. This is a copy of the data in a separate table that we can also use for things like auditing, or if we wanted to have a separate copy so we know what we're sending to a destination system. So for example, we may want to have a snapshot that is getting all of the non-closed purchase orders so that we can send that to another system. So once we have the snapshot, we also schedule it as we did before. And then we can also use a recipe if we wanted to send this to another source. So our snapshot recipe, we are staging from this table, and then we can promote to other sources. So one example would be an S3 bucket, where we can specify which columns are going to be mapped to a field in a target CSV format, or we can promote to something like Supply Chain Orchestrator or another JDBC planning application. And again, we're able to extract the columns of the destination system and auto map a lot of these fields. Again, we'd go back to our business schedule and set those to run. This is an example of how Data Fabric Studio can be used as a data gateway from any source system to any destination system.